Donald Trump just took a wrecking ball to India's biggest export market. Overnight, the U.S. president doubled tariffs on Indian goods, from 25% to a crushing 50%, the highest rate Washington has slapped on any country except Brazil. His stated reason? India's continued purchase of Russian oil. But behind the sound bites lies a different story, one of political pressure, high-stakes bargaining, and a leader in New Delhi refusing to blink. This isn't just a trade dispute. It's a test of wills between the world's most powerful democracy and the world's largest. And the stakes go far beyond customs duties. What's unfolding could redraw the map of global alliances. The escalation began with a signature move from Trump's playbook: public threats, then immediate action. On July 30th, he announced a 25% tariff on Indian exports, set to take effect on August 7th. Just a week later, he added another 25% penalty, explicitly tied to India's oil imports from Russia. The combined hit? A staggering 50% tariff, the sharpest economic weapon Trump has aimed at any major partner. Not all goods are covered. The U.S. quietly exempted sectors it cannot afford to disrupt. Pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, steel, and aluminum remain untouched. But for most other Indian exports, from textiles to machinery, the door to the American market has suddenly become far more expensive to walk through. Trump's executive order went further still. It targeted indirect imports. Goods routed through third countries would also face tariffs, closing loopholes and making it clear there's no back door into the U.S. market for Indian exporters. The White House line is simple. India buys Russian oil, so it must be punished. Yet the numbers tell a different story. India imports roughly 36% of its crude from Russia. China imports more, about 47%, but faces no such penalty. The European Union still buys Russian gas, liquefied natural gas, and petroleum products. Turkey remains the largest importer of Russian refined fuels. None of them have been hit with a similar tariff sledgehammer. When pressed on this double standard, Trump dodged. Asked about U.S. imports of Russian uranium, fertilizers, and chemicals, he simply said, "I don't know anything about it." For New Delhi, this was confirmation. The tariffs weren't about Ukraine or oil. They were about leverage. Trump had already pushed for a sweeping trade deal with India, demanding zero tariffs on American goods and unrestricted access to India's agricultural and dairy markets. India refused, protecting sectors that employ nearly half its workforce. Now, the tariffs are being wielded as economic blackmail. If Trump expected Prime Minister Narendra Modi to rush to the phone, he miscalculated. When the 50% tariff hike was announced, Modi didn't call the White House. Instead, he spoke to Brazilian President Lula da Silva, whose country is also facing a 50% tariff from Trump, and discussed forming a joint front against what they both call tariff aggression. India's official statement pulled no punches, calling the U.S. action unfair, unjustified, and unreasonable. It reminded Washington that India's energy purchases are based on market needs and the energy security of 1.4 billion citizens, not geopolitical games. Behind the scenes, India began signaling potential retaliation. Officials weighed targeting politically sensitive U.S. exports, particularly in agriculture, while also accelerating diversification away from the U.S. market. And perhaps most symbolically, India has paused certain defense procurement talks with American firms, including deals for combat vehicles, missiles, and aircraft. The breakdown didn't happen overnight. For months, negotiators had been working on a framework. India had been willing to offer real concessions, lowering tariffs on U.S. industrial goods, about 40% of what it imports from America, reducing duties on American cars and alcohol, and committing to buy $25 billion worth of U.S. energy. But the talks collapsed over agriculture. Trump wanted full market access for U.S. farm and dairy products, duty-free entry into India. For Modi, this was non-negotiable. Allowing such imports would undercut millions of small farmers and dairy producers, destabilizing one of India's most politically sensitive sectors. When India refused, Trump didn't just walk away, he moved the goalposts, tying the dispute to Russian oil and triggering the tariff escalation. India isn't alone in Trump's firing line. Brazil shares the 50% tariff rate. Switzerland faces 39%. Myanmar is at 40%. China and South Africa are at 30%. Even close U.S. allies like the EU, Japan, and South Korea have been hit, though far more lightly, with rates around 10 to 15%. But there's a pattern. Countries willing to sign lopsided deals with massive investment pledges get tariff relief. South Korea secured a 15% rate after committing to a $350 billion investment in the U.S., plus concessions on sensitive agricultural products. The EU pledged $600 billion in investments, though with no binding plan. For India, this model was unacceptable. Photo ops and political wins for Trump, with no reciprocal market access in return. Rather than fold, India is doubling down on its strategic autonomy, strengthening ties with Russia. National Security Advisor Ajit Doval met Putin in Moscow to discuss energy, defense supplies, and broader strategic cooperation. Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar will follow with his own visit, setting the stage for a possible Modi-Putin summit in India later this year. Opening a new channel with China, Modi is set to attend the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit, potentially meeting Xi Jinping, another sign that India won't be boxed into an American camp. Exploring BRICS coordination, Brazil's Lula has proposed a collective pushback against Trump's tariffs, pooling market power to absorb trade shocks. These moves send a single message to Washington. India has options. For India, the immediate challenge is shielding its exporters. The U.S. is its largest export destination, with bilateral trade exceeding $130 billion last year. A 50% tariff will make many Indian goods uncompetitive in the U.S. market, forcing companies to pivot to Europe, Southeast Asia, and Africa. For the U.S., the tariffs will raise costs for importers, costs that will be passed to American consumers. Industries dependent on Indian goods, from textiles to specialty chemicals, will face price hikes and supply disruptions. And in a broader sense, Washington risks undermining one of its most strategically important partnerships in Asia. This dispute isn't just about economics, it's about control. Trump's tariff template is clear. Demand zero tariffs and full market access for U.S. goods. Keep U.S. tariffs in place, even after a deal. Insist on massive headline-grabbing investment and purchase commitments. Nations that agree get lower tariffs. Those that resist, like India, get punished. It's a strategy built not for sustainable trade, but for political theater. And India, unlike some, is refusing to play that role. Trump's tariff blitz was meant to bring India to its knees. Instead, it's brought out its spine. Modi's government is signaling that no amount of economic pressure will force it to compromise on core interests, especially those tied to food security, energy sovereignty, and strategic independence. For Washington, the risk is clear. In trying to strong-arm India, it may push one of its most valuable partners toward a more independent, multi-aligned future, one where American leverage counts for less. And for the rest of the world, the lesson is simple. This is the new trade battlefield, where tariffs are weapons, markets are pressure points, and alliances are tested not in war rooms, but at the negotiating table. America wanted a deal. India chose dignity. Is this smart strategy or self-sabotage? Will Trump's tariffs strengthen America's hand or speed up its isolation? Drop your thoughts in the comments and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter in this high-stakes economic standoff.